history. This chart goes back to 1 AD, so 2,000 years ago. And this gives you the split of GDP by country share, on the right-hand side, through time. So back in 1 AD, this is India, red bit is China. So 2,000 years ago, 70% of world GDP, give or take, was China and India. Today, it's a comeback. And China and India, but mostly China, are re-establishing their rightful position as the world leader in terms of share of GDP and global power. That is their destiny. And it's not new, they're simply recapturing what they used to have. And they had this dominant position, look at the scale, up until around 1850. And in 1850, what happened? Happened in the UK, the Industrial Revolution. And what happened to world GDP in 1850? This is 81. This is 1850. That's world GDP. So that was the first time that people, men and women, had tools, real tools, mechanistic tools, to amplify their output. So there was a productivity explosion, and GDP went exponential. That's worth remembering in terms of the age we're about to get into, where we have new digital tools which are going to make us enormously productive. But back to here, then the United States got formed. An independent America was formed 250 years ago, which we'll be celebrating in July. And the US became the dominant world power, and now is fading. But the US today, as a result of that, of course, is the largest economy on the planet, $32 trillion. China at the top, there's 21 trillion, give or take, GDP. Global GDP is $123 trillion. But China's coming back. And if you look at it in purchasing power parity terms, which is the simple way to equalize exchange rates, so your Big Mac costs the same everywhere. China's 43 trillion, the US is 32 trillion. Same number because it's dollars. So China's already, and has been since 2014, the largest economy in what I would call proper terms. And what is China doing with that dominance? I'm sure you know this chart. What are the two things which are going to determine the ability of countries to win the great power game in the next 5 and 10 years? Number one is power, because power powers data centers and the new world economy. And the second is what you do with that power in terms of technology and its availability, efficacy, and abundance. So China's running at about 10,000 terawatt hours currently. It's gone from nothing 40 years ago to 10,000. The US has been flat at 4,000 terawatt hours in terms of electricity generation for 20 years. China's adding about 1,000 terawatt hours per annum right now. The US is adding how much? None. It's starting to get it going now, finally. For example, nuclear generation. Nuclear capacity under construction and national origin of technology. Okay. China, India, Turkey, Egypt, Russia, UK, where's the US? Oh, there's the US, none. So if you're going to run data centers, again, you know this, you build data centers, we build data centers. You need lots of power and you need baseload power. And this is the nuclear renaissance. That's why I'm long uranium, but that is not investment advice. Nuclear renaissance. And for better or for worse, nuclear power is coming back on stream in a very, very large way. And China's building currently, I think, 73 nuclear power stations right now over the next 3 years. US is trying to ramp up now. And in 2014, President Xi said, quote, whoever wins the technological power race will win the great power game of the 21st century. So the Chinese are very focused on this. And who's winning the tech game? This is a study, or part of a study, by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. So fairly independent arbiters, and they take the output from universities in terms of the number of technology papers pertaining to each subject, and the quality of those in terms of peer reviews. And they rank which country is best in terms of university output, which is the bedrock in terms of technological development. And the lead country across these factors, there are 30 factors here, there are 64 in total. Of these 30 factors, lead country, China, 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 US, China, China, China. Electric batteries, supercapacitors, AI, advanced materials and manufacturing. There are 64 across quantum computing, AI, 3D printing, robotics. Of the 64 categories, China are the lead country in 57 of them. So just be clear, they're winning this race. The Chinese are winning this race. And what powers the new digital economy? Materials, resources, and particularly rare earths. In your phone, in this computer, it's powered by rare earths and critical minerals. Where do all the rare earths come from? They come from China. This is the US, used to be dominant, 1980. China, completely dominant today. And if you look at the capability of the US military, 95% of all US military capability in terms of weapon systems is dependent on critical minerals, of which 95% come from China. So, and I'll come to the US in a second. And when I get to the US, I'm going to frame the US, by the way, in terms of the current news flow. Middle East, Venezuela, Arctic, etc. So we'll bring it right up to speed. But a reminder, China's got the largest population in the world well, India's just surpassed it, and is now connected its population with 50,000 kilometers of railway line, which is twice the rest of the world has ever built combined. So they've joined their 550 cities with 1 million or more in each of those 550 cities by these trains. And that is business class on a Chinese train. And it's extraordinarily cheap, it's extraordinarily fast, and it's very comfortable. And that looks better than the Transnet trains. It's fair to say. It looks better than any train I've been on. And I'm seeing BYDs. Everyone seen the BYD electric vehicles now? Everywhere. Anyone been in a BYD? Anyone's been in a BYD car? They are the best cars by a lot, like really good cars. And they're half the price of anything else. So, they're going to win that. But China does have a problem. This is the percentage of the population who are aged 65 and over. That's the UK. This is China. 25% of the population is going to be 65 and older, which is a demographic problem they have largely because of the one-child policy, which came in the early 1980s. And the one-child policy was, I think it's fair to say, draconian, and was drafted by a policy developer who is still in the Politburo. But that was a big mistake, and the birth rate now in China is down pretty much 0, 0.2, 0.3. And this sometimes called the fertility rate, by the way, birth rate, fertility rate. The fertility rate has collapsed everywhere. So in most countries in Europe, it's like 1.2, 1.1. You need 2.1 children per nuclear family to sustain your population. It's down to 1.1, 1.2. Once you get below 0.6, your population literally dies within about 40 years. South Korea is 0.4. China's 0.2. So China has its issues. Doesn't mean it's going to win everything, but it's in a pretty strong position. And bear that in mind when you think about what the US is doing currently in all these regions, including the Middle East. It's up against a strong China. Okay. US. US is the largest economy in the world. We know that. That's fine. It's got the largest military in the world by a long way, and we are seeing, in real time, the flexing of these muscles of the US military capability. These are US bases. I showed this last time, 845 bases in 90 countries. That's clearly unparalleled. And there's a great history behind that, which we covered last time, which I'm not going to do again. But the exercise of that power, the US Congress did a study in 2023 in terms of how many countries the US has intervened in proactively and has admitted to. And these are the countries in red. So it's kind of been everywhere. Since 251 military interventions since 1991 and 469 since 1798. That's a lot of military interventions. I went through this paper. Some are overlapping, so it's like 5 in one country kind of a thing, but still kind of a lot. And this is what we're seeing today in terms of the projection of power. The US withdrew during, I don't want to make this a political thing, but it withdrew during the Biden administration, withdrew from the Middle East, it withdrew its military protection of power, and the US administration of today, I'll avoid the Trump word, the US administration of today is flexing its muscles again militarily. And there's a reason it's doing that. And if you want to try and understand what's happening in each of these conflicts, you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why is the US administration going into this conflict? Why is it doing that? They don't wake up one morning and just decide to do it. There's a reason. And I'll come back onto that. Okay. But the US also has issues. So this is the issue kind of in one chart the US is grappling with today. I could do lots of different ways to play this. This is one of them. This is US industrial production since 2000, or back to 1930. US industrial production has been flat, whereas US consumer spend has continued to increase by whatever that is, 50%. So in the last, 25 years, the manufacturing sector in America has been hollowed out. The consumer still spends money, but he or she spends it on consumer goods imported from China. That is a problem for your manufacturing base, for your populace, and for your military industrial base. Big problem. It's also a problem in terms of inequality. So this is the percentage change in real income since 1948. This 90% of people since 1970, or 65, what's that, 40, 60 years. For the last 60 years, for 90% of people, real incomes have been flat in America. For the top 10%, they've more than doubled. This led to a very unequal society, which leads to polarization, which leads to gross inequality, which leads to this kind of thing. This is a measure of the degree of trust people have in the broad-based institutions of the day. The media, the courts, law and order, police. 9 of those on a measure. Back in 1979, 50% had trust in the institutions. Today, half that. And we see it in the news flow. I mean, America is a fractured society today in an extremely unhealthy way. And that has implications in terms of your ability as an empire, and the US is an empire, to project power on a sustainable basis. At the same time, productivity has collapsed. And I've put this deliberately because this is relevant to the AI conversation. So productivity growth rates across the US and the West, more broadly, have gone from 5% per annum, amazing, in the 70s, to 0. And if your productivity isn't increasing, your GDP can't increase. It only increases in nominal terms. As productivity has collapsed, what are people doing? Working fewer hours. This is kind of a West versus the rest discussion now, kind of a US versus China discussion. 1870, sorry, this is United States and some Western countries, kind of 3,000 hours per year, per year. 3,000 hours per year, sometimes it feels like per week. 3,000 hours per year, today, half that. More leisure time, back to 1965, men and women. Leisure time, 4.5 hours a day, up to 6 hours a day in the West. What are we doing in that leisure time? Oh, we're watching telly. That sucks. we're literally sitting watching television and have screens today. So it's become a very decadent society in, I'll use America as a catch-all. Oh, and we're watching a lot of screens. This is back in 2019, 2018, oh, I say that, 2019. This is the average number of hours people spend a day on the internet by country. The average number of hours spent on the internet by country worldwide on average is 6 hours, 42 minutes. We're only awake for like 12 hours, well, maybe 16, or if you trump, 20. 6 hours. What's South Africa? 8 hours, 25 minutes a day. Well, this is 2019. There's obviously more today. And of course, we use internet for work and all that kind of stuff. I get that, but there's a lot of social media going on. Check your usage on your phone, how much time you spend on social media. I sometimes show this to my wife. I shouldn't do it, but there's a lot of hours there. Decadence. Doesn't feel like it in this room because we all work very hard. But on a broad-based basis in the US, and by the way, we're in South Africa. Spoiler alert, we actually work harder than a lot of the rest of the world. Which is this chart. So these actual working hours back in 1950 and 2017. So 1950 was kind of 2,500 hours. Today it is this, and this is the change. You're looking for South Africa. South Africa's here. We still work 2,200 hours a year, compared to the Netherlands, 1,430, or Germany, 1,354. Germans work hard. They don't actually work that hard. Sorry. Yeah, I was trying to find where it's. It's a good question. Where is France? Is it on there? No, not on there. United States, 1,700. I've worked in the States. The Americans don't work that hard. They really don't. It's quite startling. They spend a lot of time in the office, but they don't do much. So the change in working hours in white are the kind of Western states, down 20, 30, 40% change in working hours, what I was showing earlier. In red, a handful of, well, I guess the BRICS kind of thing, China, India, Indonesia, Philippines, up. China up 10% in the last 70 years. We're down like 40, we're down like 40% in the West. Decadence, problem. Not much talked about. And we can compare this to, not the last, was it the last empire? Probably was. No, one of the last empires to collapse, like properly collapse, which is the Roman Empire. And I did a lot of work on this to compare the US to the Roman Empire at the time. I've written papers on it. You can look at them if you'd like. There are some startling similarities between the US today and Rome in about 132 AD, which was the peak of its empire. And as the empire peaks and then declines, certain factors happen. Declining economic strength, reluctance to engage overseas. This is the Biden legacy. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, the withdrawal from the Middle East. Who came into the Middle East when the US withdrew from Afghanistan? China. Russia as well, but really China. So in the year after that US administration withdrew from Afghanistan in a shameful last stand, the year after, the Chinese spent $20 billion rebuilding Afghanistan. We go in, trash it, leave, they spend 20 billion, who do you think their friends are? So and by the way, I'm not blaming China. I would do exactly the same if I was China. I think they're being very smart. But what does the US do as the counter player? Now it's starting to push back on that influence. Inequality, look at this Gini coefficient. 0.42 in the United States. What's the Gini coefficient in South Africa? High is bad. 0.65, exactly. Worse than the world by a long way, but the US is pretty bad. Rome, at its peak, 0.43. Remarkable. I'm not sure how they knew that, by the way. Just kind of got the stats for that one. But it's the same. Top 1% on the wealth, rising populism, we're seeing that in America. Excess leisure time, this decadence issue. The Romans spent a lot of time eating grapes and drinking wine and moving to the coast and having a nice time. The wealthy moved to the fringes. They've discovered this in ancient Rome because what you saw towards the end of the empire, in kind of 280 AD, excavations of super luxury Roman villas on coastlines. Has anyone been to Split in Croatia? The Diocesane Palace of one of the Roman empires in Split is an example of this. Massive villas built on the coast. What's happening today in America? People are moving out of New York. Where are they going? Miami, Florida, Hawaii, New Zealand. They're hiding. Exactly the same. So, quick history lesson on Rome to ram this point home. This is the peak of empire in Rome, which is give or take 117, 130 AD. So, Roman Empire, 60 million people, between 60 and 100 million people, which is about 25% of the world population. Exactly the same as the British Empire, at its peak, 25% of the world population. There's kind of a natural barrier to how big you can get. And when you get this big, what you need to have is a really big army. So I'm going to make some points about Rome here, which are not on the previous slide, in terms of its monetary policy and its fiscal policy, which also led to its decline. When you've got a very big borders to protect, you need a huge army. 60 million people, 600,000 of them were in the military, so 1%. The population of Rome was about 1.2 million, which is where the proper Romans were, 600,000 in the army. And they were extremely well paid. Massive burden on the state. These are the latest numbers we have. Revenue, this is the cost of the empire. This is kind of the fiscal balance sheet. So the currency in Rome at that time were denarii. And the cost of the empire was 74.5 million denarii. Sorry, the revenue of the empire was 74.5 million. What do? You expand, you take over a country, you invade. What do you get? You get the populace for tax, and you get the wheat for bread. And Rome is all about bread and circuses. Feed the population, keep them entertained. Bread and circuses. You need wheat, you have to continually expand and get the tax take. So revenue 74.5 million. Entertainment, 26 million. That's quite a lot. Roman army, 37 million. Infrastructure, 43 million denarii. So a third of their budget went on building things, roads. I mean, the Romans built 50,000 kilometers of roads, actually, in the Roman Empire, which is exactly the same as China just built in rail. 50,000 kilometers, 10 feet deep, fully paved. Guess what the Colosseum's made of? Who's been in the Colosseum in Rome? It's made of concrete. Who would imagine that? They invented concrete to make all these things. So, deficit of 32.5 million denarii per annum. What is a denarii worth today? I looked this up. If you look at the book of Matthew in the Bible, the wage which a worker got for working in a vineyard to till the soil and pick the grapes was 1 denarii a day. Give or take $50 in today's money. So 32 million denarii deficit is $1.5 billion today. So the Romans are running a massive fiscal deficit. What do you do when you run a massive fiscal deficit? You've got 3 choices. You can raise taxes. No one likes to do that. You can reduce spending, politicians' suicide note, or you can print money. What are we doing today? We just printed $30 trillion of extra cash. 30% of world GDP is now in cash since the GFC, 2008. What do the Romans do? They printed money. How did you print money in Roman times? You reduced the precious metal content in your coins. So back in 250 BC, the content of silver in your denarii was 99%. Is it on there? Yeah, give or take 99%. 99% silver in your coin. That was maintained for 200 years until 64 AD. So this is where the deficit's starting to kick in. They need to print some money. Emperor Nero, who was probably the worst emperor in Rome I'd ever had, who had fiscal largesse, let's just say, in a rather substantial way. He was really running short of cash. So he put the genie out of the bottle. He went from 99% to 97%. And once it's out of the bottle, what do? You move to 90%, you move to 80%. And that's easy, just more money. So the silver content in your denarii went from 99% to 0.5%. What happens when you print money? Massive inflation. So the price of wheat, remember wheat, the important staple in the Roman Empire, let me get this right, In about 200 BC, it was 1 denarii per bushel. By the time you get to 300 AD, it was 36 denarii per bushel. By the time you get from 300 AD to 338 AD, 38 years, it's gone from 36 denarii per bushel to 36,000 denarii per bushel. No one talks about this. This is hyperinflation in the Roman Empire. The likes have only been seen in Zimbabwe, in the Weimar Republic, and in Hungary post-World War II. 26 stillion % kind of thing. So this ruined the Roman Empire, and this is what's starting to happen today. Inflation in America. This is price levels, not inflation. Prices pre-1950 to 1800, static, stable in America. Since 1950, prices have gone up 8-fold. You don't kind of see it, because it's like a little bit every year. It kind of doesn't matter. Your wages are going up anyway. But what happens when Romans are printing money, inflation. We're printing money, inflation. What happens? What's the release valve? Your currency. So if you measure the value of the US currency in gold, which is the only true store of value over millennia, has been since the dawn of time in Uruk, the value of the dollar since Nixon came off the gold standard, where there was convertibility at 35 cents per ounce, in 1971, in those last 50 years, the value of the dollar has gone down by 98% against gold. No one saw it, because it's a fiat currency world, you just get on with things. But actually, our ability to buy things has gone inexorably down. And the value of the Western Empire has gone inexorably down, but it's hidden. And that's a problem. So what to do about it? This is the why question. So, in a strange way, and again, I'm not going to use the T word, but the US administration incoming saw this. They saw the whole thing. Fall of empire, expansion of China, have to push back or China's going to win. How do they push back? If you agree they have to push back, or maybe you don't, it's fine too. The US will continue to decline probably, or maybe it won't. But that was the view they took. They have to push back against China and cement their own power base. How do they do that? They do that through their choice. And again, I'm going to explain now the plan of the US administration. You don't have to agree with it, and it may not work, but there's a plan. Spheres of influence. You secure discrete spheres of influence, kind of old style, at the beginning of the US Republic, back to the Monroe Doctrine of the 1850s. You secure a sphere of influence in terms of your locality. And I'll come back to each of these. You secure the Americas. You secure the Arctic. You secure Europe, and you secure the Middle East. And by doing that, you send a message to your enemy, mind your eye in Taiwan. Secure Latin America. This is why on January the 3rd, it was a Saturday, I was in Wales, minding my own business, Trump has invaded Venezuela. Really? Extraordinary, again, emotions are out, but an extraordinary military operation in terms of extracting a world leader. That's never happened before. And we can discuss the legalities or otherwise, that's not really my point, but an extraordinary venture. To extract Maduro, and Maduro's in court, I think, next week, and have in place a replacement for Maduro for when you remove him, in terms of people on the ground orchestrating this thing. So you've got 150 fighter jets coming in, you've got the SEALs coming in the helicopters. What happened to the soldiers on the ground and the defense capabilities, we still don't know. There's stories about soldiers being numbed and blood coming out of their ears and being disorientated and discapacitated. There's some weapon the US had which took out all the defenses. This is going into the heart of Venezuela, and there's defenses everywhere. And by the way, the defenses are Russian. This is also important in terms of the messaging. All the defenses are Russian with Cuban troops. Completely nullified. But why Venezuela? Two reasons. Number one, Venezuela is kind of the power broker of the Latin America, and Maduro was quote-unquote, the bad actor in that movie, and China was using Venezuela for Chinese influence in Latin America. The largest recipient of Chinese foreign direct investment over the last 10 years globally has been Venezuela. $80 billion. The strategy of the Chinese, which I haven't got time to go into today, is economic coercion. Spend tons of money, influence, make them your best friend. In one night, the Venezuelans learned the Chinese have got... What do the Chinese do in response to the Venezuela thing? Nothing. They said a few words. It was like pathetic. It was nothing. So Venezuela learned, actually, we can't depend on the Chinese if things get tough, because these Americans are in charge now. In one night, it took 10 years of $80 billion out of the equation. And Russia had a massive military presence in Venezuela. I won't get into that today, but Russian influence in America's backyard, secure Latin America, big statement. Secure the Arctic. Everyone right? This makes sense, okay. Okay, secure the Arctic. The Arctic has become extraordinarily important. I think I mentioned this last time, maybe. I've been mentioning it for quite a few years now. And if you want to secure the Arctic, you have to secure Greenland. How did Trump secure, oh, I said the T word. How did the US administration secure Greenland? By making an enormous noise about it with all of Europe and annoying everyone. But guess what, who walked away with what he wanted? Trump. Trump now has access rights to Greenland, it has mineral rights, it has vetoes over Chinese and Russian mineral rights, and it has access to military bases, which it will create in Greenland, which will be de facto US territory, like a US embassy is. He walked away with everything he wanted. And that's important because the Greenland is the gateway to the Arctic. I won't belabor these points, but Arctic is important because of shipping routes. We know this, particularly important today. So the ships are starting to go through the melting ice cap. And it's half the journey time around north as opposed to around the south. As you know in your business, half your shipping time is unbelievable. And what's Russia been doing in the Arctic? These are Russian military bases. Oh, let me orientate you. This is the Russian coastline, the northern Russian coastline. There's Norway around here. That's Alaska, and that's Greenland. So you're looking down on the North Pole. 42 Russian military bases fortifying the Arctic. How many bases does America have in the Arctic today? One. Problem. Have to secure that. Number of reasons. One, which way do the intercontinental ballistic missiles go? They go over the North Pole. You have to have missile defenses up here. Arctic. Secure NATO. I'll accelerate a little bit. What time did I start? 1:30. Okay, all right. Secure NATO. Okay, this again is I'll use the two. It's the classic Trump play. Bully people into doing what you want by making outrageous requests. And NATO's gone from the light blue 2014, this is percentage of GDP on defense spending. These are the European countries. This is the 2% guideline for NATO. All the countries are below 2%, have been for decades. Who's actually funding NATO? Dark blue line, United States. 2/3 of it comes from the US. What have the NATO countries done today? They've gone above 2% of GDP. They're now contributing to their own defense. The target is 5% of GDP, 3.5% defense spending, 1.5% infrastructure-related spending. Would they have moved it without Trump bullying them? No. And he's been bullying them for a decade now. Now, Trump does not want a weak NATO. He does not want to bust NATO up. He wants a strong NATO, because he wants a bulwark in Europe against Russia. And this is the way to do it. And then finally, and I think we'll probably be done then on the geopolitics, this is critically important, secure the Middle East. Okay, the why question. Why do you want to secure the Middle East? Because of the spheres of influence. How do you secure the Middle East? You do two things. Number one, you make Saudi Arabia the power broker. And number two, you take out Iran. And that is why the conflict in Iran came about. We can talk about how successful it is or not, or whether it's a disaster or not. We're in the middle of it. It's very difficult to call. What is clear to me today is that both sides now want an off-ramp. It's kind of been going on long enough. It's had a big effect on the world economy, which we all know about, and Iran really want an off-ramp. So in terms of the neutering of Iran, again, rationally, the missile bases have almost gone. They're still lobbing missiles here, there, and everywhere. And this is the strangest conflict I've seen. So the US bombs Iran bombs everyone else, the US bombs Iran again, and Iran bombs everyone else. It's like the weirdest war I've ever seen. And Iran, by bombing everyone else, the 11 Muslim neighbors, everyone hates Iran now. So where does this land? Iran has to get kind of back in its box because everyone in the surrounding area hates it. That's a new thing. Air Force gone, Navy gone, missile capacity gone, radar capacity has gone, no air defenses. So in terms of its ability as a country to do things and support terror, which it has been doing, it has been successfully mitigated to a large extent. Saudi Arabia has been spending 5, 6, 7, 8% of GDP on defense for a decade. Why has it been doing that? It's been positioned as a power broker in the Middle East. So this is why the Russian talks with Ukraine took place in Riyadh. So MBS could ultimately take some credit for that when we get to deal. This is why Trump, one of his first overseas trip was to Saudi Arabia to spend time with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE. Critically important that US increases in influence directly in the Middle East, because otherwise, who's going to win here? China, and particularly Russia. This is why Iran is so important. This is why Saudi Arabia is so important. And finally, all of this military enormous strength and freedom, willingness, I should say, to act, to actually do things, is sending a message to China to say, listen, if you try and go across with all your troops to Taiwan, 110 miles across the ocean, we'll take you out before you get there. Don't even think about it. We can take you out before you get there. And by the way, we'll take our President Xi while we're at it, because we can do that. We did it, we can do these things now. So this is all about pushing back on China and establishing a sphere of influence.